Good Monday morning. You're watching the China Show. Welcome to the program. We'll take you straight now to live pictures out of Taipei where, there we go, as we can see, of course, Lai Ching-te is about to be sworn in as the president in Taiwan amid lingering tensions between the U.S. and China. We'll get you, of course, more in the story. We have a full team on the ground to cover this and all the implications geopolitically. Certainly the conversation broadens beyond simply domestic affairs and conversations there within Taiwan. Of course, Stephen Anglo will be bringing him in just a moment. And the market is also coming online over in Taipei. We're little change right now amidst also the other big story, the backdrop of this melt-up in risk assets. Stocks across the Asia-Pacific are up a 7th straight day. We're at a record as far as gold, near gold prices, of course, and global stocks are now at about the highest level so far on records. We'll take it straight now to Taipei, where our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Anglo, is with us to talk us through, of course. And it's been, you know, Steve, it's a busy day today. It's been a busy weekend, too, where you are.
Lai Ching-te to be the new president there in that video, along with his vice president, Xiaobi Kim, and the outgoing president, Tsai Ing-wen. I will be here as, of course, Lai Ching-te gets sworn in to be the next president. We'll have live reaction. We'll have analysis as he takes his place at the heart of the geopolitical rivalry between the world's two largest superpowers, China and the United States.
All right, Stephen Anglo, Chief North Asia correspondent, there live for us in Taipei. And later on in the show, in fact, we'll get more analysis on Taiwan with a lot of conversations coming up here in the show with the Prospect Foundation and also the Hoover Institution. That takes place in about an hour from now. Keep your eye on those interviews coming up. Also keep in mind on your terminals, live go to keep abreast of developments in Taiwan with the inauguration of Lai Ching-te as the Taiwanese president. Takes us straight into the agenda today across Greater China. And again, this market melt up, we're seeing this rally, this 4th week of gains across these markets in Hong Kong. Property stocks and bonds, big news on Friday. More on this in a moment here. We'll unpack, and really also we've already gotten some analysis really coming out of some analysts on how, in terms of the scale, the scope of the measures put in place on the smaller side, but certainly indicative of policy intention, I think, is key. This tech rally in Hong Kong, so we're about 2.5% away now from hitting 20,000 on the Hang Seng Index, which, by the way, you know, wasn't really part of the conversation as recently as 5-6 weeks back. We get a loan prime rate today. This is for May. No change expected there. 1 and 5 years should be out in about 12 minutes from now. Data in the form of the jobless rate in Hong Kong and earnings, Li Auto and Trip.com are set to report, of course, later today. Against the backdrop of markets, 0.5% to the upside here. 7th straight day of gains. Oh, okay, we're also just getting some breaking news out of China. We'll get more on this, and when I have more details, I promise I'll give them to you. China has now included 3 U.S. companies in an unreliable list. More on that in a moment. We're looking at, okay, Boeing Defense, Space and Security, in that list out of China as well. Okay, broadly speaking, though, Nikkei 225, 1.24%. Morgan Stanley out with the notes. They're bumping up their target on the Topics Index to 3,200. Apart from this as well, yields are on the way down. Not on your screens, but I'll tell you anyway, copper is actually now hitting a record. The LME contract, 10.8 right now, as far as that specific, there we go, contract is concerned. Going into the open today, the Golden Dragon Index, worth reminding you, of course, on Friday, I think 0.3% on that. Change the page, please, if we can. There we go, 0.4%. Off highs of the day. Within this, though, of course, it's the story within the property market where volumes hit a record on Friday, turnover, 3rd highest on record. Futures are doing this ahead of the open, and of course CGBs also yields on your screens, and dollar China about 11 minutes to the first fixing of the week. We're now trading at 231 right now on the 10-year CGB. We are poised for a higher open across these markets in Greater China. We'll take it straight back to Stephen Anglo. He's in Taipei for us. Steve, lay out the foundation for us, the conversations you'll be having, of course, today as we try and extrapolate what this relationship looks moving forward.
Yeah, hi, Dave. Yeah, the man who Beijing has called an instigator of war and a dangerous separatist, Lai Ching-te, is about to become the next president if he has not been sworn in already. There you see, of course, the outgoing president, Tsai Ing-wen, paying her respects to the Taiwanese flag there, Republic of China. And Lai Ching-te and his Vice President, Xiaobi Kim, will soon be the next administration. An unprecedented third consecutive term for the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. And obviously, interesting times, cross-strait relations. And that's why we're going to be watching and hanging on every word. After this, he will give his address. I'm talking about Lai Ching-te as the new president. What tone will he take? Well, we're getting indications it will be a speech of solidarity with all Taiwanese people, of continuity of policy from Tsai Ing-wen to Lai Ching-te. And again, essentially, the message to Beijing across the strait is neither side of the Taiwan Strait is subordinate to the other. And that is key. Obviously, the DPP and Tsai Ing-wen has never really ascribed to the 1992 consensus that there is one China, but they can disagree on the definition of that. So that is key also going forward. What his take will probably be continuity of Tsai Ing-wen's policy of the 1992 consensus. There will be a number of different dignitaries here in that presidential office, including the heads of state of at least 7 of the 12 remaining democratic allies, diplomatic allies with Taiwan, including the King of Eswatini, the Prime Minister of Paraguay, Prime Minister of Belize, Palau, Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, St. Vincent, and others. And also a few representatives from the United States, including the former Biden White House economic advisor Brian Deese and the former George W. Bush Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage, and of course the chairwoman of the American Institute of Taiwan, AIT, which is the de facto embassy here in Taiwan, Laura Rosenberger. So again, we're just awaiting this swearing in for the next president of Taiwan.
Steve, just one last question with you. I can't let you go without asking you, certainly events over the weekend and the fights that broke out. When you talk about what's been taking place with lawmakers there, the reason I bring that up, fairly domestic issue, but that could come to a boil, as you mentioned earlier on Tuesday. Just give us the context there and why Tuesday is important too, Steve.
Yeah, there could be some rallies. Depends on how this bill goes forward. On Friday, there was scuffles, as you're seeing the pictures, in the legislative yuan between the rival parties. The KMT, the Kuomintang, they lost the presidential election, obviously, the candidate Ho Yo-i, but they took back control of the legislative yuan, the parliament, by just 1 seat, 52 seats for the KMT and 51 for the DPP. So the DPP of the ruling party of Lai Ching-te has lost that control. The TPP, the upstart third party, won 8 seats, and they've sort of aligned with the opposition KMT on this bill that would essentially, or could potentially, undermine the opening days of Lai Ching-te, this man's rule as president, simply by requiring, in a fast-track bill, Lai Ching-te to give a State of the Nation address every year and also have a separate meeting with lawmakers and to be grilled by those lawmakers. And they put the provision in there that if he is determined to be lying, they could potentially criminalize that. And Lai Ching-te and the DPP has essentially said this process of this bill to do this is unconstitutional. So it's set up for a potential fight if indeed this goes forward and is pushed by the KMT and its sort of partner, the DPP. They would outnumber the DPP in the KMT now led legislative yuan. So it does set up for a contentious issue. Now, it might just sound like domestic politics, but it could have lasting global ramifications if indeed this undermining could undermine his policies on defense spending and other issues with Beijing that would put the tenuous relationship across the strait in even more jeopardy.
Stephen Engel, our Chief North Asia correspondent in Taipei for us. Of course, the big story there, and it in fact has just happened, as Steve was talking, that Lai Ching-te has been sworn in as the new president of Taiwan. For our Bloomberg clients, you can continue watching all the things taking place, of course, there on Live Go on your terminal. So all the big dire entries, of course, also coming up are on that page as well. Check that out in case you missed some of the conversations and developments from earlier on today. Right, some other big stories we're tracking from around the world. The latest here out of Iran here, rescue teams are still searching for President Ebrahim Raisi here and his foreign minister after the helicopter they were traveling crashed. State media say dense fog in the region is making conditions extremely difficult. Now, the government says the country's affairs will not be disrupted. Raisi won Iran's presidency back in 2021 and has been seen as a possible successor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, Saudi Arabian state media says King Salman is suffering a lung inflammation. Now, the official Saudi press agency says the 88-year-old monarch will receive antibiotics at a palace in Jeddah after developing a high fever and also joint pain. King Salman has led Saudi Arabia since 2015. Now, the illness comes as with his son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, expected to travel to Japan this week. Right, now back to China, and another big story taking place here, are some of the most forceful measures yet out of Beijing to rescue and to hopefully bring us to some sort of resolution here to what's been taking place in the real estate sector. In fact, for more in this story, and in case you missed all of this, let's bring in our China correspondent, Min Lo, to walk us through some of the measures that they announced, of course, over late Friday going into the weekend.
Yeah, so the PBOC has cut the minimum mortgage rate nationwide, and they are also cutting down payment ratios for home buyers, for first-time home buyers to 15%, second-time home buyers to 25%. Now, that's 5% less than previous ratios. And the government has also called on local governments to buy back these unsold homes at a reasonable rate. And to that end, the central bank is providing a 300 billion yuan in relending facility to fund state bank loans. And of course, the broader hope is that by turning around the property sector, the government can get consumers to spend again. That's after those very disappointing retail sales number that we saw come out on Friday. Plus, property investments down nearly 10% in April. Home sales as well down 45% in April. But there are still many questions about how this will be implemented. For instance, which are the developers, the distressed developers that will be built out, which cities and local governments are going to receive what kind of funding. And estimates are that the government actually need to spend along the lines of between 1 trillion to 8 trillion yuan to mop up those housing inventory that are at an 8-year high. So it looks like it's still falling far short of expectations here.
There we go. Smaller, but policy intention is clear. We'll have more from Min Lo in a moment. They're our China correspondent. Just getting us up to speed here on the latest steps Beijing has taken and announced to really address the weakness in the property market. In fact, we'll be getting the insights here out of BNP Paribas joining us in a couple of minutes, and really where they think this economy heads with policy and rates. And also in a couple of minutes, the 1- and 5-year loan prime rates are actually coming out. Wang joins us in a few minutes. We'll leave you with some live pictures out of Taipei. Of course, the inauguration taking place at Lai Ching-te has been sworn in as the new president of Taiwan. Happy Monday. You're watching The China Show. Okay, there we go. Breaking news right now coming through. Loan prime rates, 1- and 5-year unchanged, 3.45% on the 1-year. Bottom of your screen, just under 4%, of course, on the 5-year, which is certainly, given the narratives around this economy recently, has really been where the focus has been on, particularly because this one is really where, when you talk about mortgages, certainly tied to this specific one as well. Okay, let's get instant reaction right now, and perhaps where we go with the story, and plus all the news we have to encapsulate from about 6 or 7 days back. Joining us here in set is Wang, Head of Greater China FX and Rate Strategy at BNP Paribas. It's nice to see you. Good morning. Why don't we start out with loan prime rates as well? So no move now, but you think they might move next month?
They're still going to move, next month. And we expect another 2 to 3 times before year end. Essentially, we think, the China's existing mortgage rate is still too high. It's above 4%. So even though the Friday's announcement about lowering the mortgage rate floor is encouraging, but that doesn't solve the existing mortgage loan, pricing problem. So more monetary policy easing are still underway.
How much more? And if you could differentiate that as well, what the new mortgage rate is, and also for existing ones as well, because it gets a bit confusing with all the rates going on as well. And how much do you think the existing one needs to come down?
I think people have done some survey that average rental yields in China's tier 1, 2 cities around 2%. Okay. So essentially, if you can't bring mortgage rates lower to close to that level, then households are still going to run a negative carry, which means they will keep deleveraging by paying back their mortgage loans. So from this methodology, it's quite clear that more cuts are still going to come.
Right, and that's on the loan prime rate. What about on the other benchmark rates? Do you expect more lowering ahead?
I think the banks will start to price lower mortgage rates, after the Friday's announcement, simply because they're also highly aware that if they don't do so, the household will, keep pay down the loans. They're going to lose their loan assets anyways. But there's a competition among the banks. There will be some, detailed calculations. But all in all, I think banks pricing plus policy rate pricing, they're all going to come down further in the coming years.
Right. There are many steps that they've taken and announced. And on aggregate, do you think, is this a reflation moment? Is it too early to talk about that?
I think in China, policy direction is always very important for market. So I think the signal that sent from Friday, essentially confirming the all-in pro-growth policy stance after the Politburo meeting. So this is very important. And I think some people are comparing this to September 30th, 2014, the last time the China started very aggressive pro-property policies. 2 years after, the market started to see property market stabilize in 2016. But still, people remember it was 2014, September 30th. That was the beginning of this all-in pro-growth policy. I think we're comparable to that at the moment.
Is it safe to assume that government bond yields have bottomed?
Not yet. Longer end, yes. I think we also get the message from the PBOC. They don't want the market to overly speculate in the ultra longer dated bonds to avoid some Silicon Valley Bank, risk for smaller banks. But for the very short end, all the way to the belly, we think there's still room for yields to go lower because, even the successful bailout in 2014-16, it takes another 1 or 2 years before the market bottomed out in terms of property investment. No doubt this time the challenge is much bigger. So initially the monetary policy still needs to take a heavy lifting, which means easing is still going to come, and that means the bonds, particularly the short end all the way until the belly, are still good buy at the moment.
Okay, so the call there is what? A bull steepener then in CGB?
A bull steepener. We have 530s steepener in the CGB curve in terms of calls.
Okay, and the implication now for dollar China is what, up, or is it because reflationary it's increasingly down?
If there's no PBOC, I think the pressure is for dollar RMB to go up because the carry erosion is still happening, right? Markets looking for Fed to cut, but that's not going to come until, let's say, September or December. So the carry at the moment is still in the RMB's disadvantage. However, as you mentioned, the pro-growth policy somehow is it will help the equity market, right? That's helping the sentiment. So that's a little bit positive. But in FX market, most of the time the carry dominates the direction, at least for the near term. The second thing is that we noticed that PBOC is still keeping a very flat fixing every day. Right. So essentially, this is in a holding pattern, still in a tighter range, and waiting for bigger things to happen, whether being Fed cuts or tariffs or other things. We'll keep an eye on this.
Plus, you have U.S. elections. So just very quickly here, do you think it's a weakening bias still, given that carry dominates?
It's a weakening bias. It's still a funding currency.
Okay. Thank you so much. Fantastic having you on the shows, as always. Wang there, of course, head of Greater China FX and rate strategy at BNP Paribas. Very quickly, just going into the opening bell here, 8 minutes, two, I guess, specific sectors you want to track very closely here. Well, industrial metals and also precious metals as well on the back of news earlier on. And at those levels, to be more specific here, gold and copper are currently trading at all-time highs. Going into the open today, Hang Seng Index is now just under 400 points short of the 20,000 level. We're in week 4. We were on week 4 last week. Do we get week number 5 of gains this week? The opening bell, 7 minutes away. You're watching The China Show. Good morning. Right, 5 minutes to the opening bell, and as you can see here on my right, this world-beating rally in Hong Kong is set to continue and extend. We're up 4 straight weeks, and 20,000 is now about 2% away, give or take, at about these levels. One stock in particular, bottom of your screen, to take an eye, keep an eye on, of course, is BYD Electronic, to be more specific, on that inclusion in the Hang Seng Index. Other stocks to watch today, that question goes to Avril Hong, who joins us right now with a preview. Avril.
Yeah, I think as a sector, we're watching those property developers very closely, but there are some that we're keeping a closer eye on than others. I mean, a lot's been said about how that property rescue plan will address about 500 billion yuan worth of those unsold homes in terms of value, and analysts have already talked about how that's not enough. 7 to 8 trillion is what they see as needed. But I think what is also worth highlighting is the way it's going to be implemented and how those funds are going to be allocated. So we might really start to see some divergence in these Chinese property developer stocks, but these are the ones that were rallying really hard last Friday. Let's flip the board and take a look at what we're seeing on the Chinese tech names as well, because of course we get the rest of the Chinese Tech 8 reporting this week. We get Pinduoduo, and then later on in the week, the rest of them. And of course, out of the 3 or 4 that reported last week, Tencent really shone through. We've seen how Baidu, JD.com also were the ones that really beat the market expectations. So there is that sense that that earnings momentum can continue, David.
There we go. A lot to watch ahead of the opening bell, just over 3 minutes away. We'll get you to that on the other side of this break. Hope you're all well. Thanks for joining us. This is Bloomberg. Good Monday morning from the Asia Pacific. Thank you for joining us as we approach the first session of the week in these greater Chinese markets. We're poised for a higher open, as you can see. It's certainly been, and certainly you stick a weekend in between, it's almost as if you turn a page, really. Effectively, we haven't. The risk rally continues just about across the world with global benchmarks. These are stocks. Record highs, 2-year highs in the Asia Pacific, 7 straight days of gains. Asia Pacific, which actually at this point in time, if we close higher for the day, would be the longest winning streak for equities this part of the world going back to early of last year. I haven't even talked about where we are with commodity markets with, in case you missed it, copper, that's London, not the U.S. Copper, and by the way, there's a short squeeze arbitrage there from about last week, and also gold hitting the highest levels. First time in, to borrow that phrase from Disney, first time in forever. Okay, mainland markets opening up this way. We're looking at a 10 to 1% to the upside, CSI 300. Small caps, the China Index, CSI 1000, seeing some upside. Some of the big names bottom of your screens. Moutai is flat at about the open, CATL 1.4%. We're also looking at, and by the way, we're also looking at the brokerages in particular, given the sort of volumes that have come through, especially in Hong Kong, especially in the property sector. So case in point, we have a Bloomberg gauge that tracks property stocks. On Friday, volumes hit a record, turnover third highest on record. We're up 75% on property stocks. And here's a crazy bit of trivia too. After 75% rally, we're still down 75% from the peak. Anyway, sink your teeth into that one. Hong Kong markets coming online as well. 4 weeks of gains. 19.7 Should we call that? Yeah, 19.7. Let's spin it on hope. 19.6. Okay, 19.6. 19.7. Okay, 0.6%. HS Tech still seeing some upside here. A couple of earnings to tell you about today. The rest of the China's tech are reporting this week. PDD, of course, as Avril was pointing out, reporting later today. This week, rather. Li Auto and Trip.com, those are the results on deck this Monday. BYD Electronic added to the Hang Seng Index. Shinny Solar was removed out of the Enterprises Index in favor of Zijin Mining, which is not on your screens, but that should be also seeing some upside. Of course, that's a gold mining stock. And very, very quickly, glance at developer stocks, okay, behaving themselves after what's really been a manic, 4 weeks? The gauge was up 22% just last week alone. We're up overall to 1.1%. Although, I mean, you're still trading at price to book of 30%? So hardly out of the woods, but direction of travel at this point remains clear. Right. Now, some analysts say that when you look at some of these measures to rescue the housing markets are a bit too small to end the crisis. So the support package, in case you missed it, announced on Friday, features a $42 billion lending facility from the central bank to then fund those loans for the firms charged to then buy some of the unsold housing stock. For more on this story and what this means really for the banking sector in particular, because they're being called in again in terms of just national service, Francis Chen is with us to talk us through this. Francis, well, lots to unpack with you. Why don't we start off with a simple question? How can banks help out this time around?
Well, as usual, to fund those initiatives. And in this case, we are talking about citing people with knowledge. Local governments may ask the local state firms to step in, buying those unsold homes. Hopefully those will be completed unsold homes. And the banks will finance those local firms to do those purchases, and those will be turned into affordable housing. So now we have to do the math for whether banks have enough capacity to fund those purchases, at least in theory.
Right. Okay, so that brings up, let's open up a lot of doors there. So when I look at the balance sheets of the banks then, and we don't know yet how much they'll buy it for, do you think they'll need to raise money? What does it mean to the credit profile or the quality profile of some of those assets? And what does it mean for margins too?
Sure.
Of the banks? Because you have lower mortgages as well to take care of.
If you try to gauge the size of unsold completed housing inventory, according to National Bureau of Statistics, there are about 400 million square meter left. And the last ASP from the same, bureau is like 9,800 RMB. You do the math, it's like 4 trillion RMB. Only for that part.
Right. But and that's all, though. That's all inventory, right? That's not
completed housing.
Completed housing, okay.
So if there will be a discount, assuming a steep discount, we don't need 4 trillion. And for the banks, just give you some numbers for reference. Last year, the whole banking sector lent out 22.2 trillion of new loans. And so far this year, it's like 9.5 trillion of those. So is that a huge amount? Taking a deep discount to that 4 trillion, I think is something that the banking sector can absorb. And also the state sectors in China, they are of better asset quality than the private sector. I just take reference to what Ministry of Finance are telling us. The debt to asset ratio for the whole state sector is like 65% as of March. And if you take a look of the index stocks like CSI 300 or Shanghai Composite Index, the debt asset ratio is like 84-85%.
Okay.
So just giving some numbers for your reference.
Right. So that's one part of the rescue package. The other one that was announced on Friday was effectively removing the floor on mortgage rates, right? And mortgage rates are already quite low on new prices. On existing mortgages, that's still where you need to get the adjustment lower. What does it mean for margins, and what is demand for credit right now?
I think if we talk about margins, net interest margins have been on a downtrend for more than 18 months for Chinese banking sector. It has been pretty severe for them. Many of the banks can even report revenue growth for consecutive quarters. And this year, consensus is still expecting like 17 bips margin squeeze for maybe 10 largest banks we cover in Hong Kong, the Asia banks, with 45% market share or so. And if we add this to the equation, the margin squeeze can extend to 2025 because many of the repricing will also be coming in at the turn of the coming year, 2025.
Right.
And the mortgage rate for the whole system is like 3.69%, or either like 50 bips down in the last 14 months.
If you discount it from the benchmark.
You expect another 30, 40 bips down.
Okay.
At least the market is expecting that. And it's about 16% of all the loans in China are mortgages. And for the big banks, the big state banks, is more than 20% of their loan balance are mortgages.
Very quickly, in 20 seconds, if you could answer this.
Sure.
Are the dividends at risk, though? Because that's the equity play for the banks.
Well, so far we didn't see that yet.
Okay.
We have different factors also coming into the equation. There has been a capital rule reform starting from the beginning of 2024. Anyway, it leads to a bit of reduction to the risk-weighted assets for the banks. So the capital ratios may look better. According to our calculation, as of March, they have excess CET1 capital of about 4.4 trillion. Okay. I'm talking about the top 10 banks we're covering.
Well, those are the banks that typically the big investors buy anyway, right? Yeah, okay. Wow, Francis, 9:30 on a Monday morning. How could you chuck out this information? It's too much for me. More on that in a moment, of course. Francis Chen, amazing stuff. Bloomberg intelligence analyst. By the way, for our Bloomberg clients, our question of the day is how far can this housing market rescue continue to lift this Chinese equity markets? We're up 4 weeks now. It's a world-beating rally when you look at some of the Hong Kong benchmarks. So chime in, of course, on your terminals, and you can slip into my into my DMs on the terminal if you're a client, to give your take there as well. You have my permission. There we go. Okay, we'll take you straight now back to Taipei. Live pictures there with Lai Ching-te now sworn in as the island's president. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. All right, we're off to a decent start across equity markets right now. CSI 300s, 0.6%, 3,700. Hang Seng Index is what, 370. Am I doing my math correctly? Yeah, 370 points there to 20,000. Well, a lot will depend on earnings. So you have, I think, Pinduoduo this week, rounding up the Tech 8. More on that in a moment. Also, when you talk about EVs, also coming out with earnings today. I think Li Auto and XPeng is coming out maybe before Wednesday. Anyway, to correct me on that, Linda Liu is here to give us a sense of the earnings coming through. Okay, let's start with Li Auto. And when does XPeng report?
XPeng should be reporting tomorrow.
Okay.
And then we've got Li Auto today.
Yeah.
And the thing we're really watching for is gross margins.
Okay.
Because the Chinese EV market has just been going through this intense price war. It's really taking a hit to manufacturers' bottom line. So Li Auto seems to be holding up okay. Their gross margin is expected to be around 20% or holding up above 20%, and their profits are also expected to grow this quarter. For XPeng, the picture's a bit more mixed. They haven't been profitable since they were founded, although net loss for this quarter is expected to narrow. So these are the key metrics we're watching for.
Yeah, and I think XPeng has kept pushing back the target of profitability over the years or so. Is that why they're not paying their suppliers? Are they paying their suppliers? Are they paying on time is the question.
It's an industry-wide trend. I think cash and liquidity pressure is just getting very intense. Like I mentioned before, there's a price war. In China, you've also got an economic slowdown weighing on consumer sentiment. All of these EV makers are just creating a very intense competition. So they're trying to drag out the payments time when they're trying to address their bills, and hopefully that can give them some leeway to manage their cash flow. But that means the pressure is rippling out to the wider industry. The bigger suppliers are holding up, but the smaller suppliers are also being pressured to essentially delay receiving what they due. So we're going to see consolidation speeding up in the industry.
Speaking of competition, news this morning, we might get another front of competition here. Japan and Southeast Asia. What do we know about that?
Japan and the ASEAN countries are looking to perhaps come up with a new auto strategy, I think, as soon as September this year. Essentially, with Chinese EVs gaining foothold in all of these parts of the world, probably except for North America. In Southeast Asia, BYD, ION, you've got some of these brands already establishing production there. They're really making headways in these emerging markets. And especially Japan used to be the leaders in these markets. So they're really hoping to come up with this new strategy to compete against these new Chinese players.
Linda, fantastic. Thank you so much. Linda Liu there, our Asia Transport reporter. To the other big corporate news that we got here, this concerns Didi Global. Jean Liu will be giving up her roles as president and board director of the Chinese ride-hailing giant. It's after almost a decade in those two specific positions. Now, the shift comes as the company tries to revive growth after this regulatory crackdown out of Beijing. Let's bring in Sarah Zhang, our China Tech reporter, for the latest here. Yes, so she's given up those two positions, and she's now being what's the new gig right now?
So what Jean Liu and the CEO Will Chung are saying in an internal letter to employees is that she will no longer take on those roles, and the president role of the company will no longer exist. Instead, she will be a permanent partner, and she'll continue to report to Will as sort of a chief people officer, so focusing more on the talent building, organization, and social responsibility side of things. She and Will were trying to reassure employees in this memo that she will stay on at the company and her responsibilities won't change. But of course, we know that this is a big change. Like you mentioned, she's been in these roles for nearly a decade, and she was one of the ones who was spearheading, Didi's success over the years and their fundraising, including the backing of major companies like Uber, Tencent, and SoftBank as well.
This comes at a fairly critical time, or maybe even part of the strategy, really, as the company tries to revive growth and this turnaround, really, amid the crackdown, regulatory-wise. What does this mean for that endeavor? Exactly,
that's right. I mean, I think Didi has been trying to mount this comeback since everything that went down with their 2021 IPO. I mean, as we remember, regulators came in with this cybersecurity probe, and they were forced to delist in New York. That probe closed sometime in 2022, where they had to pay a $1.1 million fine. And a personal fine also that Jean and Will both had to pay as well. We reported that they are planning to potentially relist in Hong Kong sometime this year. We don't know how this would potentially affect those plans or where those plans are at this current moment, but definitely Didi is trying to come back to growth, and we're seeing some signs of that.
Sarah, fantastic. Sarah Zhang there, our China Tech reporter. Right, so lots of corporate news to tell you about here amidst this market melt-up we're seeing. I'll leave you to look at markets. 15 minutes into the session here, CSI 300 is now trading just at about 3,700 for the first time since about September of last year. Good start to the week. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Here are some of the other big corporate stories that we're tracking at this point. Star Entertainment, that's the Australian casino operator, says it has received inbound interest from a number of external parties, but has not yet had any substantive talks here. Now, that comes as the AFR reports a consortium led by Hard Rock Cafe and casinos considering here a bid for Star. Now, that would see the firm rebranded and its properties separated from the eventual casino operator. Right. SpaceX's Starlink has launched its internet services in Indonesia. Now, CEO Elon Musk says his other companies are likely to invest in the nation as well, but did not provide details at this point. Indonesia has been courting Musk's Tesla to invest in its battery industry, given its strong mining sector, of course, in particular here for battery metals. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin has resumed sending tourists to space. Let me reread that. It's Monday. Bear with me here. Launching 6 private passengers on a short flight more than 100 kilometers above the Earth. Then the passengers included Ed Dwight, a former Air Force captain who in 1961 was actually selected as the first black astronaut candidate. The company plans to debut a much larger and much powerful rocket later this year, capable of launching, this time, cargo into orbit. Okay, from up in the skies to what's beneath the earth here, we're talking mining with BHP, the world's biggest, of course, is considering whether to make an improved bid for Anglo American before, of course, the deadline this week. Let's bring in our metals and mining reporter, Paul Hunt, for more on the story. Yeah, Paul, can you just recap what happened last week for viewers that might have missed all the big news there when I think it was Anglo announcing its strategic path forward?
Well, last week was a very busy week indeed. BHP had just made an improved informal offer valuing Anglo American at $43 billion. The structure of that offer still would see Anglo have to spin off its Amplats platinum business and, of course, its Kumba South African iron ore arm too. But then Anglo's board came back and announced the results of a strategic review. That strategic review had been announced last year, but shareholders were kept in the dark all the way up until last week when the board finally revealed its plan that it would divest its Amplats business, it would divest its met coal assets in Queensland of Australia, divest De Beers and simplify itself into just 3 areas. Of course, the copper would remain, the Kumba iron ore business would remain, and so would the controversial Woodsmith polyhalite business. Now, the Woodsmith polyhalite business is a fertiliser mine, but it's a $9 billion capex project, and Anglo had been spending about $1 billion a year on that. As part of the review, Anglo said it would calm down with spending. It was becoming a bit of a cash sink and would only spend $200 million in 2025 before not spending anything more on it. So it was a massive move or pivot by Anglo's board. But the message that it sent to BHP was also, we can divest assets in South Africa and elsewhere and get through those regulatory approvals. So BHP may come back. The deadline is May 22, so over the next 3 days there's a chance that they'll come back with a higher offer. We don't know for sure. What we can be fairly sure of, though, is that it won't be a formal bid at this stage, not until Anglo's board come to the table. Obviously, BHP want to do due diligence, and without being able to do due diligence, they won't be putting forward a formal bid.
Yeah, hopefully they do. So you mentioned the deadline. That's on Wednesday. That's end of business, I believe, London time. So what's the state of play, and what happens to BHP if it does walk away then?
Well, if it walks away, it has to leave the table for 6 months. If it were to put forward a binding proposal and go forward with that, obviously the story continues there, but realistically it will probably be an informal bid if we see one before that Wednesday deadline. Now, if BHP do walk away for 6 or 12 months, that will give Anglo time to start its divestments and take action on its strategic review. But what does that then look like for BHP if it wants to come back to the table? There is a chance that Anglo could see a higher valuation. Does BHP really want to pay something like a 30% premium on the business in 12 months' time? So a lot at play here. The stakes are high.
Paul, thank you. Getting us up to speed there. Certainly Wednesday, all eyes on that too. Ooh, that's just around the NVIDIA time too. Just occurred to me. Paul, thank you. Paul Hunt in Melbourne for us. Metals and mining reporter. All right, if we look at markets right now, I'm just looking at my screens, and this Hang Seng Index rally continues to give more on that in a moment. Copper and gold, record highs in both, 10.4. Well, 11,000 right now is in play. Wow. Really, huh? Copper, 11,000 a pop. We'll talk more about really the I would say discrepancies, the spreads between where you are in the London contract. There's the one, of course, in the U.S., and there's the Chinese currency denominated one that's trading, of course, in Shanghai. CUA, by the way, is the ticker for that. Gold, record highs on this too. Brent is seeing some upside, 0.3%. Overall, commodity markets have been on a tear, in case you missed that. So, in fact, on the commodity spot index, that's now at about highest level here in about a year. or so, bottom of your screens. Thank you so much to my fantastic producers. There we go. The state of play across Chinese equity markets, 25 minutes into the session here, is one where, well, for one, the CSI 300 is now testing this 3,700 level for the first time in about 8 months or so. More signs that maybe, and this is in Hong Kong, this rally might be due for a breather. The 14-day relative strength index on the Hang Seng Index is now at 80.5, which is about at parity with the highest levels during the peak of that reopening rally in early of last year. So arguably, we're now looking at the most overbought conditions in Hong Kong going back to 2021. Anyway, but momentum continues. This is Bloomberg. Right, Taiwan, Daja, Taiwan, Shanghai. There we go. CSI 300 just off highs of the day, although it looks like we could be retesting this 3,700 level. We were briefly above that for a brief fleeting moment. First time since early October that we're trading at these levels. Hey, we're here, right? Start of the week, LPR, no change there, 1 and 5 year. Big news, of course, on Friday. Smaller than expected package, lending package to be more specific on the property sector. That specific group of stocks, though, up 75% on the high-yield bond index. More on this in a moment. We've rallied from under 50 cents to now north of 86. So markets have come a long way in terms of pricing this recovery. We'll have to wait and see, I guess, for more concrete, I guess, a change, a fundamental turnaround in the story, because certainly new home prices on that specific measure still down, though. 0.6%, I think, was the last metric. 11 straight months of declines. Right. On this equity market, but here in Hong Kong, to be more specific now, we're up 0.3%, a third day of gains on the Hang Seng Index, 4 weeks in a row. And we're now looking at this specific measure of momentum. Reason we're doing this, it's now actually at these levels. It's now done this in the last few minutes or so. It's now surpassed the highest level that we had back during that reopening rally in 2023. So overbought signals are flashing on this world-beating Hang Seng Index, to be more specific there. So we're not trading at, well, that specific one's trading at 80.5 right now. So that's the highest. And perhaps that's the reason also why when you look at the Hang Seng Index intraday, we're also coming off highs of the day. Maybe, just maybe, 19,613. Asia ex-Japan, S&P futures on your screens. Fed minutes on deck this week. You have inflation coming out of Japan and the UK. You have NVIDIA reporting earnings and a rate decision in South Korea, 0.5% to the upside, 2-year highs in Asia, all-time highs in the global benchmark, all-time highs in copper, all-time highs on gold. Up 7 straight days now on the regional benchmark. So it's risk on as we speak today. Okay, we'll leave markets there for now. In the meantime, though, let's get you up to speed on certainly events in Iran over the last day or so. So rescue teams are still searching for the president there and his foreign minister after the helicopter they were traveling in crashed. The Chinese foreign ministry about in the last hour or so has put out a statement effectively saying that they are closely monitoring the situation there. Let's bring in Jill Desis, our news desk editor, is with us to just get us up to speed on where we are here. What do we know at this point?
Yes, David. Well, look, Iranian President Raisi, he was coming back from an event, a sort of celebratory event at the northwestern part of Iran along its border with Azerbaijan, and it seems that the helicopter crashed somewhere in that mountainous region. Rescue teams have been working on this for many hours at this point, but you have to understand that this is a really, really remote section of Iran, very mountainous. It's also been very foggy, very rainy, so they still have been trying to get rescue crews out to the region, trying to figure out, where they can reach this helicopter. We still have no updates on the status of any of the individuals on board. It seems to include both the president, along with his foreign ministers, along with a couple of other local authorities, but still no news on exactly, whether anyone had survived the crash, what's exactly happening there. They're still trying to get those rescue teams in place.
It is, of course, I think 5 in the morning there, so it's also quite dark. To your point there on just the difficulty in the conditions. We heard from Iran's supreme leader effectively saying that there won't be any disruption to the country's affairs. Just talk to us about what the government's been saying as well in terms of the order of business and perhaps where we go from here.
Yes, David, well, you have to understand, so the supreme leader in Iran, that's ultimately the true seat of power within the country. So the president carries out a lot of those orders, but ultimately it kind of runs up to the supreme leader. So I'd imagine that in the event of anything, including, potential death of the Iranian president here, you're looking at a fair amount of policy continuity within that region. Now, again, this is happening, this crash has happened at an incredibly politically tumultuous time within the Middle East. You've obviously got the war in Gaza is a major consideration here. There's also been some domestic turmoil at home within Iran. So I'd imagine that in any case, if it does indeed happen to be the case that the Iranian president has passed away as a result of this crash, it would take, I think, about 50 days for a vice president to come in and kind of lead things in the interim. Then you'd have another election take place. But then after that, I mean, it's difficult to see Iran put someone in place who doesn't share a lot of the same political views as the president. He's seen within the country as a pretty, ultra-conservative hardliner. Imagine that there's going to be some level of policy consistency in the case that he has passed away in this crash.
Jill, thank you. Jill Deesis there with the latest of what we know so far, and not a lot at this point in time still. Some other big stories that we're tracking from around the world. Let's stay in the Middle East here. Saudi Arabian state media says King Salman is suffering a lung inflammation. The official Saudi press agency says the 88-year-old monarch will receive antibiotics at a palace in Jeddah after developing a high fever and also joint pain. King Salman has led Saudi Arabia since 2015. Now, another big political story that we're watching is this time in China. So the country is investigating its Minister for Agriculture and Rural Affairs for what it calls serious violations of the law. Tang Renjian is the latest high-level government official here to be investigated for alleged wrongdoing. Now, he was appointed Minister of Agriculture back in December of 2020, rather. President Xi Jinping has spearheaded a sweeping anti-corruption campaign since 2012, ensnaring dozens of Communist Party officials. Let's take it straight back now to Stephen Anglo, our Chief North Asia correspondent. He's in Taipei for us with the inauguration, of course, there of Lai Ching-te. Steve.
Yeah, well, let me recap what's happened. Already, it is now President Lai Ching-te and Vice President Xiaobi Kim. They have been sworn in within the last hour as the new leadership, the new administration here. A continuity candidate, if you will, the unprecedented third consecutive term for the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party. But keep in mind as well, we all know that January elections also ushered in a change in the legislative yuan, where the KMT, the main opposition party, took a one-seat lead with 52 seats there, 51 for DPP, and the upstart third party, the TPP, won 8 seats. There's also 2 independents who tend, we're told, to lean more towards the opposition KMT. So that puts this man, Lai Ching-te, on a bit of the back foot as he comes in as the new president now, because he will have some challenges within the legislative yuan. And we've already seen steps to potentially, I wouldn't necessarily say undermine, but potentially add some turmoil to the opening days of his presidency. There's already a bill going through that was hotly debated, and actually there were scuffles that broke out Friday in the legislative yuan, essentially over steps to require the new president to have a State of the Union of the nation address, as well as meet before legislators at least once a year. And within that bill, it dictates if he is determined to be lying, he could be held on criminal charges. So that is something that sets the stage for Lai Ching-te as he is now president, domestic politics, but the big overarching issue obviously is going to be cross-strait relations, and he is going to give a speech within this hour, just before top of 11 o'clock hour, where he will outline his policies towards China. It will be a status quo policy for sure.
Stephen Anglo, Chief North Asia correspondent in Taipei for us. In fact, Steve will be back in a few minutes, of course, with a roundtable discussion and really what this all means, really taking this into a deep dive, cross-strait relations, to challenges facing Taiwan's new leader as well. Just ahead of that, before we get to break, two pieces of breaking news to tell you about. One is, we talked about the health of the Saudi king. So this concerns Japan right now. So the crown prince was actually supposed to be headed to Japan there, and we now understand, based on this statement from the Japanese, that the crown prince has delayed his trip because of developments around the king's health. That's one piece of breaking news dropping just in the last minute or so. The other is concerns markets right now. So the 10-year yield, this time in Japan still, has risen to 0.975. Why is that level important? That's now taken out the high of last year, which means the entire JGB curve, 5, 10, 20, 30, and 40-year yields, that entire part of the sovereign yield curve in Japan is now at the highest level in at least a decade or so. The 10-year was the one that was the blip. We're now across that curve from 5 all the way out to 30 to 40 years, to be more specific. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
The U.S. side should fully realize the high sensitivity of the Taiwan question, stop any form of official interactions and military contact with China's Taiwan region, and stop sending wrong signals to the Taiwan independence separatist forces, and deliver on its commitment of not supporting Taiwan independence. The Taiwan question is at the core of China's core interest. The Chinese side will take resolute and decisive countermeasures against any Taiwan independence and separatist activities and foreign conveyance and support.
That was China's Ministry of National Defense, the spokesman there, of course, amid the developments today there, the inauguration of Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te. More on that in a moment. Just some breaking news at this point in time. The Islamic Republic News Agency, or the IRNA, that's the official news agency of the Islamic Republic of Iran, has now reported that the crash sites of Iranian president, the helicopter, of course, which crashed, has now been found. That's what we know so far. One specific headline more. We will get you more details on this, of course, once we do have more information. But as of now, the crash sites of that helicopter has now, according to official news, has now been found. Let's pivot back right now from breaking news there to what's taking place in Taiwan. A couple of minutes back, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has put out the congratulatory note out of the U.S. here for President Lai Ching-te. Let's take the helm, really, of the inputs there at the very heart of the geopolitical conversation and the rivalry between the U.S. and what's taking place in China. We heard from the Chinese. We've now also heard from the U.S., from Antony Blinken. Lai is set to give his inaugural address very soon, which will be closely watched, of course, for signs and how they will navigate this very complex relationship and their place in it, of course. Stephen Anglo, Chief North Asia Correspondent, rejoins us now from Taipei with his guest. Steve, take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. Yes, it is now President Lai Ching-te and Vice President Kim. They have been sworn in as the next administration, of course, a sort of a continuity administration from the past 8 years of Tsai Ing-wen, the president, the former president. There are a lot of issues, obviously, domestically, but also internationally, geopolitically, and the relationship that Taiwan plays in the supply chain, the global supply chain of semiconductors, and the role it plays in the geopolitical rivalry between China and the United States. Let's broaden the analysis of this inauguration day and bring in two of our guests. One who is here sitting to the left of me, Raymond, Vice President of the Prospect Foundation. And also down the line, we have Kharis, Templeman, Hoover Institution Research Fellow. So we're going to talk about a number of different things, gentlemen. Raymond, let me begin with you. And I can also pose the same question to Kharis here. As Lai Ching-te takes over as president, there are issues of his mandate, how much of a mandate he potentially has. He got 40% of the vote, right? At the same time, we have the former president of the Kuomintang, the KMT, going to Beijing and getting welcomed by Xi Jinping. There's a polarization in this country. How much does all of this potentially undermine the opening days of President Lai Lai's term?
I think for the whole term, for the Lai Ching-te administration, that will be a huge divisive issues on this, which pretty much a continuation of what's happening during the campaign. The basic differences between the two camps is whether Taiwan should strengthen its capability to defend itself versus to have a more negotiable or more friendly relations, trying to achieve peace by dialogue. I think that debate will continue. But it's one thing to remember that the voters of Taiwanese give Lai Ching-te a clear mandate to maintain this past 8 years deterrence project, which means that we will cooperate with the United States and the international allies to strengthen ourselves of capabilities to defend.
You're a regular commentator in Taiwan media. You do expect a bumpy road ahead,
yes,
though, for cross-strait ties. What do you expect from his speech, which will be held within this hour? What kind of tone should he strike?
The dilemma for any speeches for the president of Taiwan is how do you maintain the status quo, but not giving too much weight to the one China policy which Beijing wanted to hear. So for the Tsai Ing-wen administration, which will be the constitution of the ROC Taiwan, but for Lai Ching, there will be a nuance to that I expected, which will be constitutional order of the ROC Taiwan, which means that's not pretty much 100% tied to the text of the constitution, but the whole order developed by the democratic Taiwan within its constitutions.
Kharis, let me bring you in here. I know you've been watching this election process quite closely. I mentioned that he got 40% of the vote, but that's because there were three main candidates with the upstart TPP, Ke Wen-je, kind of throwing a bit of a spanner in the works there. But they also, the DPP lost the majority in the legislative yuan by 1 seat, essentially, to the KMT. And there's been some already political wrangling going on and fights going on within the parliament body. How much of a mandate do you feel that Lai Ching-te actually has?
Well, I think if we compare his situation to Tsai Ing-wen's 8 years ago, he's clearly boxed in a way that she was not. He obviously won only 40% of the vote. He doesn't have a legislative majority. When I was there in January talking to DPP officials after the election, the working assumption was that he may actually struggle to win re-election in 4 years. So I think he has a lot less room to maneuver domestically than he did, than his predecessor did, either 8 years or 4 years ago.
Now, obviously, Taiwan is very strategic. That's why we put so much emphasis on this election process, strategically, economically, with semiconductors, but obviously militarily and the potential conflict across the Taiwan Strait. I know you wrote one of the chapters, or co-wrote one of the chapters in the book, The Silicon Triangle. And if we can bring chips into this dialogue, there's been a lot of talk about this so-called silicon umbrella, that the importance and the rise of the semiconductor industry makes Taiwan far more strategic now than it was in decades past. Do you buy that argument? And what happens when there is this friendshoring trend where manufacturing of chips is going to Kumamoto, Japan? It's going to Arizona. Does that lessen Taiwan's strategic importance to the United States?
I don't think it lessens the strategic importance of Taiwan to the United States. And in fact, Taiwan's own importance far precedes the emergence of the semiconductor industry as a thing in Taiwan. So the U.S. was very concerned about Taiwan's security in the 80s and 90s as well. And the other thing to note here is that TSMC itself is running up against limits of production in Taiwan. The semiconductor industry as a whole is producing, they account for something like 20% of Taiwan's overall GDP by themselves. And so you can't take that number much higher without having some major negative impacts on the overall diversity of Taiwan's economy. And so I actually think the future of the semiconductor industry is going to be increasingly global. And TSMC is doing the right thing by trying to diversify parts of their supply chain and parts of their production outside of Taiwan. Taiwan is, facing challenges with recruiting labor, with having enough electricity and water. And just being able to build out the fabs that they need for the next generation of production, and diversifying to satisfy concerns of both other foreign governments, but also more importantly their own customers, including big customers like Apple, who are concerned about an interruption of potential crucial supplies. I think those things are all important here.
So, Raymond, in the realm of safety and geopolitics and the protective umbrella of the United States, do chips make Taiwan safer or more vulnerable, potentially?
In terms of friendshoring, it's definitely safer because Taiwan proved itself to be so essential in the global supply chain, especially in the advanced chip making. And so for the short term, Taiwan is an integral role for the global supply chain. So the allies will try everything to defend the stability of the supply chain.
Now, militarily, how prepared is Taiwan, and what still needs to be done? He's bringing in a new defense minister, Wellington Koo. He's a civilian. We haven't had that in more than a decade. So does that help break down maybe the vested interests within the Taiwan military, where the defense minister is usually a former general or something?
We hope so. That's a clear signal that Taiwan got very serious about its defense reform, because for the modern warfare, it's very clear that's not decided by the battlefield, but for the whole society. For example, for the reform of the society, civil resilience, and the building of our psychological defense toward, for example, propaganda, will be the whole overall wholesome view to the national security. I think national defense will be part of it, integral part of it.
They need to modernize and make it more of a military that is more mobile, more flexible, and modern with the times, and have that porcupine strategy. It's hard to devour a porcupine full of missiles, right?
Yeah, and with international consolidation, and for example, to really talk pinpointedly about what Taiwan needs to defend, no matter porcupine or for the deterrence of gray zone operations from China, and to cooperate with the allies like Japan and Philippines.
Kharis, let me bring you back into the conversation. What do you expect, and what do you think the Lai administration needs to do to keep the peace across the Taiwan Strait at a heightened sense of conflict, if you will, or the threat of a conflict?
Yeah, well, I think on the one hand, there's a need to kind of stay the course on Tsai Ing-wen's approach to cross-strait relations and relations with the United States. So Tsai was, I've argued many times that she was about the best president the U.S. could hope for in Taiwan, because there were no surprises in the relationship. And so if Lai is able to follow her lead and to maintain that consistent, reliable partnership with the United States, I think he will help preserve peace across the strait. And then secondly, I think some of the defense reforms that the Tsai administration started to put in place still have a long ways to go. And if Lai is able to move those to the next level, so deepening the training of conscripts, for instance. The Tsai administration has just reimposed a one-year conscription requirement, and there's a lot of concern outside of Taiwan that may look a lot like the old conscription training, where there wasn't a whole lot of shooting of guns or other things that might actually be applicable to a real fight. And so having some more realistic training in that process is, I think, important.
Okay, Kharis Templeman, thanks so much for joining us, and also Raymond Song. We could talk the whole hour about this topic. We appreciate you giving us time on Inauguration Day here. David, we'll send it back to you.
Right, Steve, fantastic stuff there. Markets are bid this Monday morning. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Right, this melt-up in risk assets continues. Copper prices just about across these exchanges surging this Monday morning. Right, welcome back to shows here. We're just headed into the Tokyo lunch break there with risk assets bid. The Topics Index, 2,800. In fact, Morgan Stanley just dropped this in our inboxes earlier on. They've revised their forecast here on the Topics Index now by 400 points. 3,200 is where they think the index will be. And the Japanese 10-year bond, just coming off highs of the day, but effectively at these levels, your entire curve from 5 all the way to 40 years, JGB's wise, highest level in at least 11 years there. The entire curve, including just a few minutes ago, the 10-year yield. For a pulse check of how the rest of the region is doing, let's bring in Avril Hong is with us, of course, to talk us through this. Well, I don't know, Avril. The question is, how much fuel is this property rescue plan in China providing for markets at this point?
Yeah, I think we've already seen quite a bit of that as of last week, right? And the Asia stock gauge climbing for the 7th straight session. So I think on the margins, that is providing a bit of a lift. But let's also take a look at what we're seeing in terms of the movers, because on inauguration day, we're seeing TSMC, the stock in focus. We have reports coming in that the Apple CEO actually visited the TSMC plant. We have our Bloomberg intelligence analyst telling us that we could see the company in a bit of outperformance mode, given how the AI sector is still really focused and reliant indeed on its advanced processors. Still, the stock is down today. Star Entertainment, another one that we're tracking, down under, surging 23%. This is the Australian casino operator, and it says that it is being courted by suitors, including Hard Rock Group. This could go some ways in helping to, ease some of its funding issues. We're seeing BHP Group, another one that we're watching amid the Chinese property relaxation and the measures there to support the Chinese sector. But we're also keeping an eye on it. Of course, this is because there might be an improved version of its deal to take over Anglo, and that is something we're watching later on the wheelers for the board, and take a look at what's moving in the FX space. This week, as you talked about earlier, we're seeing the yields in Japan, the way they've moved, but we're also keeping an eye out on the nationwide CPI. At the end of the week, inflation expected to moderate, so that could put the doves still in control of things on the BOJ. New Zealand dollar, something that's been rallying of late, but we could get the RBNZ keeping things on hold and then potentially sending a bit of a less hawkish message. So that could help that rally in NZD to actually peter out, David.
Avril Hong there, getting us up to speed here this week. Risk assets are bid. Yep, you have the rate decision, you have Fed minutes, you have inflation coming through, I think, out of Japan and the UK. And, of course, I think we also have a rate decision coming out of the Bank of Korea. More on that in a moment. Breaking news right now coming through out of Thailand. GDP numbers for the first quarter, 1.5%. The estimate was for 0.8%. We're coming slightly better compared to the previous reads. On that spectrum of that range of forecasts, this one actually coming at the highest end of forecasts there. So, yeah, 1.5% growth in Thailand. That's almost double the median forecast, and at the very highest end of that range of economists' projections. Data there for now. Let's take it back to markets and bring in Mary Nicola for some color and context with these markets. Mary, we're off to a fantastic start to the week.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a really good tailwind on Friday from U.S. equities, and that's going to continue straight through. The real thing and the real impediment for stocks and for sentiment this week is really going to be NVIDIA's earnings. We know that it's been the darling for the tech sector, the darling for equity markets, and so it will really have to deliver not only on expectations but on outlook as well. So that's really going to be the hurdle for this Goldilocks environment right now. And so we're going to be in this mode of everything is positive, but then we'll have to see whether NVIDIA does deliver.
Right. The most important stock in the world. I mean, even part of the pricing around Fed conversations, I would imagine, also hinges on the guidance coming out of Jensen Huang and his team. Underscore for us how high the bar is for NVIDIA this time around, particularly since I think if you look at this current earnings season in the U.S., that bar to impress investors has been particularly high. We've seen some disappointments in terms of market reaction, Mary.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're going to have to be spectacular, essentially, to say that that Nvidia is doing well. We've seen some of the other big tech in terms of the Magnificent Seven that have come through, and a lot of them have come through. But it's more about the outlook, and if the outlook doesn't register and doesn't come strong, that's where things are going to be really affected. Especially because you need fundamentals to stay strong for U.S. equities when you're starting to see cracks in the U.S. consumer. And of course, we'll have some other consumer companies reporting this week who will also give us a flavor of what's happening with the consumer and consumer expectations.
Right, Mary, speaking of fundamentals, I want to bring in the conversation around commodity markets, particularly if I consult Dr. Copper, things do look good. What's going on with copper today?
Yeah, there's obviously some supply constraints and concerns about supply in the copper market. That's really been helping and support this rally in copper. But of course, copper's been an integral part and an integral resource for a lot of this new energy and the green revolution. So obviously the demand is still there. But you get that tailwind for copper for, let's say, the Australian dollar, which is a big exporter of copper. So that's going to be positive as well. And of course, for something like the Chilean peso, which is a big exporter of copper. But obviously the supply constraints are going to continue to weigh on prices, and that's where you've seen that drive continue.
Might be going into also the conversation around Chinese property, Mary, if you could just contextualize first the question of the day and maybe where your thoughts are on really how this housing market story might be fueling the broader equity market rally in Greater China, Mary.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said on what's happening with the China equity markets. Especially it's more about the fact that policymakers are prioritizing property and saying that this is going to be one of our key focuses in terms of trying to prop it up. The problem is, if you digest the news from Friday, is that it doesn't really come through as to being enough to support the market. We've heard from many analysts who are saying that the size that they've put out isn't enough to stem some of the issues in the supply. They've definitely done a lot in terms of doing something on the demand side and trying to remedy the demand side, but it's still about supply, and it's still about delivering a lot of the property that hasn't yet been delivered. It's about managing the supply glut, and the numbers that they're suggesting aren't enough. So if the market does have a pullback, you would expect that there could be some more news coming through. And also the support will have to come from the central government in terms of saying, so not to put an extra burden on some of the local government finances that we've already seen.
Mary, thank you so much. Mary in Singapore first. Mary Nicola, our MLive strategist there. Right, from semiconductors to solar panel stocks and some of the world's fastest growing industries perhaps are risking falling prey to another round of trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. And as you can see, there's the old tariff and the new one, in some cases the higher one, and in some cases, of course, the only one. We're coming off zero in some cases there. Sang-Lee Chad joins us right now to talk us through the winners and the losers from these tariffs. And yeah, why don't we answer that? Who's winning and who is losing?
Yeah, so these tariffs are not really new, although some of them quadrupled, for EVs from 25% to 100%. But what's in focus is that it might not be the end of it, because Biden and Trump are jostling to show the voters who can be tougher on China. But what's in focus now is whether Europe will follow suit, because if Europe does that, Europe consumes 45% of the new 3 exports from China, the EVs, the lithium-ion batteries, and the solar cells. So that would be a pretty much of a worrisome thing for Beijing when comparing to U.S. It only imports 0.2% of the solar cells and just 1% of the Chinese EVs. So those are in focus. And when we look at the EV sector, of course, BYD is in focus with 27% of its revenue coming from exports last year. And so if Europe does that, and also U.S. is aware of the plants in Mexico, so that could be used to circumvent those tariffs. So that's in focus. CATL is always, the stock to watch in the batteries, and it could actually benefit from this tariff for the next 2 years, because it also makes ESS batteries, and that could mean that many are coming to rush to purchase those batteries before the tariff hits. And then, of course, the medical equipment sector was something of an interest for me, especially when given the tariffs were zero there, and it suddenly went to 50%. So we've seen some rubber glove makers in Malaysia, their shares soar, along with Kumho Petrochemical from South Korea that actually produces this latex for these rubber makers when it was hit with 50% tariffs. BD and 3M from the U.S. are going to benefit from this. One last thing could be solar cells, Trina Solar and LongYi. There wouldn't be too much of a material impact on those Chinese solar cell makers because they actually make their brands in Southeast Asia, which is not the subject to these tariffs. Yeah. But again, the First Solar from the U.S. is going to be the biggest beneficiary.
Okay, so that's wow, what an entire list there. Okay, so what are you watching out for today? I think we have some earnings coming through in Greater China. Yeah, what else is top of mind for you?
Yeah, so we are watching, of course, the property shares. After Friday, we've seen the gauge jump close to 10%, but today we've seen it's gotten down a little bit. So we're just trying to see how the market is gauging the real impact from these mortgage rate lowering of these mortgage rates and some of these more measures coming in. But the analysts are saying that we need more of this, more than this, for the market to be boosted. And of course, we're looking at the travel-related stocks with Trip.com, the giant bookings company, reporting earnings on Tuesday. And so we've seen it hit another record today after Xi Jinping actually said that he will be, he called for measures to boost those tourism sectors. We're seeing other bookings companies as well as some of the hotel companies are also rising today.
Yeah, there we go. Online booking agencies, hotels, and also retailing after the president, of course, calling for further supports to boost the tourism sector. Sang-Mi Cha on everything. There we go. In these greater Chinese markets, our Asia Stocks reporter. Yeah, we're doing well this Monday morning. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
The market has about 2 years, probably even more than that, of inventory outstanding in the market. So if you want to go from 25 months to 18 months, right? So you need probably about 7 to 8 trillion yuan. With the special long-dated treasury bonds and also some of the recent stimulus measure, including the rediscount loan, I think it amounts to about less than 2 trillion yuan.
And that was Hao Hong, partner and chief economist at Grow Investment Group, speaking with us earlier on, of course, in the big news out of China, or big-ish news out of China, not as big as expectations, but fairly major as far as these forceful attempts to rescue the housing market is concerned. In fact, more in the story right now. So the figure is 300 billion, that's renminbi, of central bank funding to help some of these state-owned enterprises then buy back some of these unsold housing inventory. Yes, there's a lot of parts involved here. Chang Shu is with us here on set, our chief Asia economist, and also Christy Hung, of course, who oversees our industry sector analysis on the property sector. Christy, well, thank you so much for joining us, by the way. Good morning. Why don't we start with Christy? 300 billion, certainly not nearly enough given the amount of unsold homes. But what is 300 billion? What does it help?
Right. I think the issue is when we look at developers' balance sheets, a lot of them already pledged their unsold inventory to secure bank loans, meaning that even if the government are buying the unsold inventory, it's not going to generate a lot of incremental funding to shore up their liquidity. And also, if you look at 2023, we already had 100 billion yuan pilot program in 8 cities to for local governments to buy their unsold inventories. That didn't generate a lot of impact in easing the inventory level of reviving home sales. So it's unsure how an enlarged program with 300 billion yuan is going to make a difference. I think, for this program to work, we need the stars aligned. Developers will need to be willing to take the steep discount on the unsold inventories. We also need local governments to be willing to implement this program, given how affordable housing is actually something with low return. And also we need banks to be willing to lend to these local governments, because with the 300 billion program, banks do need to bear the risk of 40% of the loans.
Changshu, can China pull this off?
I very much share Christy's concern, although I do see quite a lot of positivities coming out of this. I mean, the signaling effect are quite strong. You can see that the government will keep trying until at some point the market something works. So that's a positive signal. An interesting thing is that the government is trying a new approach, right? Previously, the government had been trying to cut the funding costs and try to relax various restrictions on housing purchases. And as we just talked about, they haven't worked especially well. So this particular home buying approach is started as a city level sort of experiment, as it were, just for a few cities, but it looks as if the government, the central government, is promoting this and potentially turning this into a more nationwide measure. So, and compared to some previous approaches, it does have the advantage that it doesn't create more supply, which is a big concern for the market. So we do see some positivities coming out of this, but the issue how big the program is big enough to make a dent on the inventory, and also various implementation challenges. We do see this is more like a first step. We expect more could be coming.
Right. You're not the first person that I've heard that from, that this one might not be as big, but if this doesn't work, they're prepared to put in something bigger. How important is it that the central government is now involved?
I think it's very, very important. The local governments, much they want to save themselves, we don't think they really have the resources. And the central government will have to have some way of providing resources. But obviously the challenge will come how they allocate resources. The locations or the regions that need most help, most likely to be those with greater inventories and greater challenges in fiscal positions. And if the money goes there, can the market be turned around in those locations? So there's an issue of whether the money goes to the most needy regions, or you support the regions, the central fund, the central government, that lead in less, but they have the hope of stabilizing. Okay. So there's very challenging questions for the central government. I know.
It's a very big place. Christy, I'll bring you in now on the other measures that they put. So they've removed the mortgage floor, effectively, and they've also lowered the down payment requirements. How do those two things help?
Right. So for down payment and mortgage rate cuts, we think that is going to lend a little bit of help to first home and also upgrade demand for property. But as we said before, it doesn't matter how much the government is making it easier for people to buy a home. That won't overcome a lack of confidence, especially on the economy and on the jobs outlook. So I think an issue here we're looking at is, as they're making down payment smaller, the monthly installment is going to be bigger. So can households stomach that change? Right. So if we are looking at the mortgage rate cuts, actually 2/3 of cities are already eligible to remove the mortgage rate floor for first home loans. So now I think the biggest change would be for second home loans, which is like investment demand. But if people's home price expectation is not changing, they might not be investing in properties after all.
Team, thank you so much. Christy Hung and Chang Xu there on the economics and also the industry side of things. Just unpacking first this latest major piece of news out of China. We will leave you right now with a look at property shares. We have been on a 4-week tear. Pause somewhat today. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. It's time for your China Brief. A look at what's making headlines in national newspapers, or in this case, not making headlines. The inauguration of Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te. The Global Times is running a strongly worded piece about the event, describing Lai and his party as secessionists. The article says the Taiwanese people want peace, and, quote, observers who express concern that Taiwanese authorities might work to shrink the possibility of peaceful unification. Right, turn the page. Xinhua quoting President Xi Jinping here, stressing efforts to boost, in this case, of course, we're seeing the market today, the tourism sector. He's calling for improved service quality and also that the sector could give a boost to economic development. Now, Xi also adds that China has the largest domestic tourism market in the world and is now, in fact, a top destination for travelers. Right, in financial papers today, and we're pivoting to the property sector, more reporting here on some of these support measures which were announced. The PBOC-backed Financial News is flagging the possibility of mortgage rates falling even further. The front page story quotes industry insiders forecasting a decrease of up to 0.4 percentage points after authorities scrapped the floor on rates at this point in time. And of course, on Friday. One piece of news here, Securities Times says that the new policies are already having an impact. It says Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and other major cities saw a home buying surge over the weekend's activity, with some housing developments almost selling out. Now, on the property story, right, let's take stock on where this rally is taking place. Of course, 75% up from the bottom. We'll keep an eye on volumes, of course, to an indication really of this tactical and cyclical trade. Turnover, third highest on record on Friday. Volumes, highest on record in this group of stocks. Right, now in terms of price, we're up 4 weeks. We're up 75% from the lows. We're looking at 2018 highs. Of course, we're measuring this and how far we are from that. Guess what? After 75% up, we're still 75% down. It's a long way back up to the very top. Now, as far as the bond market side of the equation is concerned, we've also seen a rally as far as junk bonds are concerned, up nearly every single week since November. And certainly on price itself, the average price on our junk bond index has risen from 50, and we're now trading at about 86.50 cents. So we've gone quite a bit. There we go. That's a look, taking stock really of, or taking bonds, both assets, of course, of how far this rally has come. It's a fantastic day to be long these risk assets, particularly, of course, if you're also long commodities as well. Copper price is hitting the highest level on record. That's it from the China Show. Thanks for joining us. Plenty more ahead, though, with Bloomberg Markets. This is Bloomberg.